Hi, I'm Jen Gaster from HR Heads, and today I am super delighted to bring to the table Shereen Daniels. Shereen, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Jen, for having me.
Pleasure, pleasure. To those of you who don't know Shereen, and if you're on LinkedIn, I'm sure you will already, she's a huge advocate for anti-racism in business. Not only is she vice chair of the Black Business Association for London Chamber of Commerce and Industry, she's also the founder and managing director of HR Rewired. So Shereen, let me jump straight in and ask you, how did you even get into HR in the first place?
Well, like most people say, by accident, it's always the one, isn't it? By accident. However, I will context that by saying part of my degree, my first degree was business and psychology. So okay. HR was a few modules. And I thought, I actually quite like this, because I was thinking I was going to be an organizational psychologist when I was. So
related.
19, it is related, absolutely. So, so kind of by accident, meaning I studied some modules and then decided, actually, I want to get into HR. So off I went when I graduated.
Okay. And you went through the normal channels, the HR generalist route?
Yes, I did literally, as you did. I actually think I worked for a temping company called Working Girls. I mean, you couldn't get away with the title. You couldn't get away with the company.
Not today.
No, I think I've still got a pay slip from way back then. So I did the whole temping route. So, did temping, general administration, trying to find my first HR assistant. I remember it was my thing to try and find a HR assistant role. So got there eventually.
Good. And look, as your career has evolved and developed, you've clearly narrowed that remit and specialized in that field of equality, diversity, and inclusion, and specifically within that field now, racism and racism within business. I guess Black Lives Matter, it's drawn attention to racism and taken it perhaps from what was a social and political issue and really put it front and center of business and made it a business issue as well now. So from your experience, Shereen, what common challenges do you see with the organizations that you work with in that space?
So I think first off, Jen, just to say that for most of my corporate career, I deliberately did not touch EDI. I didn't do anything to do with diversity and inclusion. Even when I was asked to go and speak at HR conferences, I always changed the topic slightly to fit what I wanted to talk about, partly because I felt like being internal, right, and seeing what happens within organizations. And this, now I'm out of it and supporting them in their journey, it's the same challenge. Because people are so uncomfortable talking about race, about racism, to the extent that they might even stutter over the word Black, what happens is you never get to that crux of the conversation. So diversity and inclusion, or equity, diversity, inclusion, becomes about everybody else. It becomes about women on board. It becomes about this community over here, that community over there. Let's do more. Let's have, because they're easier conversations to have. It's not that the issues are easier. This is not a competition from that point of view. But nobody realistically, you can go and talk about why there's a lack of women in heads of departments or director roles, and nobody's going to flinch. It's unlikely anybody's going to fall out. You're probably going to get the support to go and do something, and you can blaze it over your website and internal comms that you're supporting women, you're supporting disability, you're supporting LGBTQ, but something about racism and Black people makes people deeply uncomfortable, which means they do nothing.
Yeah.
So with the context of what happened with the protests last year, what you were finding is probably, I would say, a third, right? So you had a third of organizations who were probably very plugged into the social consciousness, as I call it in this. So they're like the Ben and Jerry's of the world, the Salesforces, the Walmarts, the big companies that have got a history of already doing something specifically around equity, targeting, easing things for the Black community, either in the wider community or within organizations. So you had those guys that were already off they go, and they
have an agenda. Yeah.
Got an agenda, they're off. Then you had the people in the middle who went, oh my goodness, okay, we didn't really take diversity and inclusion very seriously, but now we need to. So off they went to go and hire D&I people or hiring consultants. And then you have a third of organizations who are still kind of like going, oh, like this oh God, you know,
this will pass, this will go away, and I won't have to think about it.
This will go away. And I think not only do they probably feel uncomfortable, when I say they, because, you know, organizations are not sentient beings, the leadership teams within those organizations are not only feeling uncomfortable about it, some of them don't actually understand why this is such an issue, because they don't want to make it an issue. So you've got a very different dynamic. So in terms of the problems, you know, or the three common problems that I face with the work that I do here and in the US, if we take this middle group of individuals, right? So those that want to do something, so they recognize for whatever reason,
there is a desire. Yeah,
there's a desire to do something, they just don't know how. So within this group, what you tend to find, and I think this is something that's across HR and a lot of D&I, I know it's a bit of a generalization, but very rarely do I find people who know enough about this, is because we think about it in terms of traditional business problems, which means we apply traditional business thinking, which is, we've got an issue with this whole racism thing, quick, we need a chief diversity and inclusion person, or get the chief people officer to go and, you know, come up with a strategy. Very few people understand what racism is. And you can tell they don't understand it because some of the actions that they take can look performative. So I call it style over substance, you know, so you have lots of statements, you have hashtags, you have marketing material with more black faces on it rather than before. But racism isn't just about behavior. And I think if you've got to understand the systemized element of racism, the different ways it shows up, but also you've got to get into those uncomfortable conversations about racist ideologies. And this is the bit where people go,
yeah.
Oh,
and it's
Lord,
difficult, right? It's really difficult. And if it's difficult, we all know we'd rather go, ooh, step away. Let's not have the conversation. So how do you bring that conversation to the table? Because for me, I think businesses' awareness has improved over the last 12 months. And we're definitely, you know, as an HR recruiter, I am now handling vacancies, as you just rightly said, around Chief Diversity and Inclusion Officer or whatever other title of that ilk. And they might not have really existed 12 to 18 months ago. So they are doing something about it. But I guess the question is, when the norms and values are embedded, you know, how do you build that into behavior? How do you affect that change that isn't just that headline strategy?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. I think firstly is we spend too much time trying to fix people.
Yeah.
Therefore, what we don't do is think about the systems, the policies, the practices, and then the behaviors that link all of those things up. So in HR terms, we're used to thinking about policy, we used to think about culture change programs, we used to thinking about training, raising awareness. All of those things have a place, but that's the icing, it's not the cake. And what's happened is over the last, you know, from the professional years point of view, 20, 30 years, diversity and inclusion, we've been thinking that this is going to solve all of this magically, even though we don't talk about it. So when you're getting to this point now, when you're hiring in either more Black people because you're looking at visual representation, or you're hiring in your D&I lead or your EDI lead, you've got to think about, do you understand enough about the problem? Because if you don't, what will happen is you'll end up spending time, energy, and money putting things in place that fundamentally make no difference.
It's the lip service.
It's a lip service, and it's not intentional. I would say it's not intentional, but so some people are thinking, well, I kind of think like I know it, so I'm just going to get busy doing. Because if I'm busy doing and I can show that I've got this in place, I've got a KPI dashboard, I've got policies, we've got a training thing in place, then nobody's going to say that we haven't done anything. But what a lot of organizations are not understanding is, with the increase of social pressure is also the increase of social knowledge.
Yeah.
So what you have is you have customers, you have employees, you have people in the community, you have investors, shareholders, all doing their own bit of research. So what happens is they're looking at what you're doing through a lens of what they know. And if they know more than you and you haven't done a little bit more of the digging, they will quickly say, well, I get that you know, you're going to hire in this person or you're going to do this, but fundamentally, how is that going to address systemic racism? You know, how is that going to address institutional racism if you're within the public sector, you know, and all of those things? To answer, you've got to know what those things are.
Yeah. And how do you, when you consult with those organizations, what do you do to start with? How do you unpick those layers? Because everything otherwise will feel superficial.
It will, and I think there's two entry points, I guess, with what we do. So we are a HR consultancy, but we only specialize in anti-racism. So our job is to get people started and help them stay the course, you know, no deviation, you know, that's what we're here to support you with. And executive briefings is what I spend the most of my time doing. So that is literally when I will talk to the board a little bit like this. So there's a little bit about my story, about how I got here, you know, and, you know, just how plugged in I am and therefore the company is into this issue, you know, to the extent that we get asked all over the world to do things in different contexts. So they have to understand and feel reassured that they're safe for the brave conversations to start. Do you know what I mean? So my credibility, my presence, my influence in this space actually will help them get off to a confident start. But my job is not to make them feel safe, it's to create the safety. My job is to push them to have the brave conversation. So we start that dialogue at that point, because I've seen it when I've gone into HR teams last year when I did straight into HR. And what was happening is they took the journey, but if the board aren't on the same page, they would get in this block where they were like, right, we need to do this, we need to do this. And the board were like, well, I don't understand why.
They've not bought in.
They're not bought in. And because they don't understand. So if I start there, inevitably it makes the life of the chief people officer, the EDI officer, the comms person, the strategy, the PR people, makes all of those guys happy, because we're starting with a foundation. But it also enables the business to make a decision to say, do we want to do something about this? Because I always say, you know, you've got to be intentional. So if you decide to do something, that's great. It doesn't matter that you don't know how. Don't worry about doing or saying the wrong thing. That's what I'm here for. Don't worry about that. But what you can't do is think that we're only going to do this because we absolutely have to. And you haven't done as a leadership team any more reflection, because that's when they will say or do the wrong thing publicly because they haven't gone on the journey. And that's where the reputational risk comes in.
The number of businesses where I've had a conversation, just what is on your agenda, and ED&I is it, and it's listed as a project, and it's a project to be started, delivered and finished. And I don't know about your experience, but for me, and I'm not the expert here, but I can't help but think if you treat it like a project, when it's done, it's not done. You know, it doesn't ever embed it into the actual soul of the organization. You know, that we talk about EVP and why people might want to come and join a company. This has to surely be the writing in the stick of rock that, you know, that you break down the middle and it's fundamentally in there. So how do businesses do that?
I think, just like you said, this is, and no one likes to hear this in business, because they just go, oh God, but this is lifelong work, you know, and what I say to, you know, boards, to the chair people, to the non-executive directors is, you've got to be okay with starting your organization on this journey, knowing the change that you so desperately want to see is going to be after your tenure is done. You know, so from a corporate governance point of view, it's all about building a sustainable business. So you've got to play your part to start off building a sustainable business, knowing that this is always going to be a rolling agenda item in some way, shape or form. So once you've got out of that whole, we got to put a plaster on it, and then when the wound is healed, it's fine. And, you know, again, this is an issue that's been going on for 400 years. You know, diversity and inclusion came out of the civil rights movement. It was for Black people to be treated fairly in the workplace. And here we are, you know, 60 years later, and it's not worked because we've hijacked it for comfort to give to everybody else. So I think what I encourage leadership teams to think about is just that the consciousness of the world is changing, you know. So this is about thinking, You've got to be part of the solution. You cannot be seen to be perpetuating the problem. Silence is perpetuating the problem. A lack of informed action is perpetuating the problem. So once they're feeling, oh gosh, then I go, right, okay, so you've started the hard bit, and the hard bit is listening to this, and then having this debate and discussion about terminology and all the rest of it. The next bit is to listen to your Black colleagues, if you have any. Some businesses don't, and that's a question that you've got to ask, and then we get into some of that. And then you start with, what does our anti-racism framework need to look like? How do we engage with key stakeholders? How do we measure? So when we're looking
that was my next question, because I think when you're addressing a board, my experience is they want that return on investment. Okay, whether that's financial or however else it might be measured. If they're making that investment emotionally, even, how do you say to them, and I appreciate lifelong work, but even that foundational stone has been successful, is good. How do you look to measure that?
I think there's a couple of things. I think one, by the time they finished working with me, they also understand that our preference for facts, figures, objectivity, and case studies is inherently an aspect of racist ideology. So they stopped asking me that question after about 10 minutes. But I'm like, all right, moved on from that bit. But I say to them, it's the cost of what you can't do as a business. So what that means is, so I did a live with an impact investor who in states, and he talked about the fact that when he sees all white businesses, whether it's the About Us page on the website or whether, it's just a majority white business, he's not making a judgment call, but he's questioning their judgment. Because what he's saying is that you're going to look at the world through one lens, which means you're going to miss opportunities. Now, I never over-index on the economic argument for having more representation in organisations, because, to be honest, I always say to people, like, the economic argument is no different to slavery. And they go, oh, Shereen. I was like, well, listen, think about it. And they go, I never thought about it like that. And I go, right, but this is the point about getting into some of this work. But we live in a globalised society. Just by the definition of, I do things here and I'm talking to people in DC and Boston and California. So if you don't think differently about how you diversify your business, then you're missing out on market opportunities. You're missing out on the opportunity to go after new territories. But what you're also doing is putting a very big sign to your current customers and clients to say, this is not part of our gig. Now, you might retain some people who like you for saying that, but you've got to ask yourself, are they the clients and customers that you want for the future? And I remember having this conversation with a founder and two of them, male and female, and they were like, oh my goodness, no, that's not what we
Horrified.
Yeah. Horrified, absolutely horrified. So, but sometimes you need an external person to help challenge some of these and really unpick, because I'm going, well, they go, well, if we just wait 6 months, okay, and what are you hoping will change? Why do you want to wait 6 months?
Why will anything change?
Why? Right. And you're getting into this. So my job is not to convince people of racism being a thing, because I can't do that. That's not what I'm here to do. I've had validation from the world, so we're good from that point of view. My job is to help you get started, but also to help you make sure that you're addressing the real issues and you're going for impact rather than intent. Because for too long, we've been happy with a statement, a safe measure, of, I don't know how many people have been promoted and whatever else it is. And we've never addressed the root cause.
I find in the last 6 months, particularly organizations that I have worked with and recruited for have just started to really embrace blind recruitment. And I mean blind as in not telling me even which university they've been to, or if they've been to university. No reference to he or she, no reference to dates from an age perspective, and no reference now to name, so that you can't even get a sense of where that person's from. And the number of people that have taken from my shortlist, the candidates that I in my heart know are brilliant for the job, and I can't prove it because you don't do it twice, but I know first time round, if that had been black and white with different names and education and all the rest of it, they wouldn't have made the grade. and yet
No.
their capability and what they can do. So for me, introducing blind recruitment and encouraging businesses to think about their talent pools on that basis is great, because as we said earlier, it's that diversity of thinking that I believe has the most value to an organization. And that thinking comes from experience and background and different approaches and all the rest of it. And it's not easy to do, but I just really want to, I'm so passionate about getting businesses to think in that way when they look particularly at talent pools, existing talent pools in the organization, or those new ones they're bringing in.
Yeah, no, I agree, Jen. But I think the thing that we have to be careful of is, unfortunately, recruitment always gets the short stick, meaning everyone always goes, well, it must be the recruitment talent acquisition team. What are you doing or not doing? Why have we not got, all these?
They can't drive it. It doesn't start with them.
It doesn't start with them, because the point that you made is you can de-bias a process within an inch of its life. But when those individuals step into the organization, and if the organization hasn't tackled the cultural, the behaviors, the systemic things that are within there, they're in, and then they're calling you, Jen, 3 months later and going, this environment is not for me, and they're back out the door. So that's where we spent all this time thinking that the recruitment aspect of D&I was broken. So we spent a lot, and you know this from your world, right? So it's like, what more can we do? But actually, to some extent, you have the easiest part in terms of getting people through, the process, because you can do blind CVs, you can do buys, you can do all of these things, you can go out to different pools, but there has to be something attractive about the organisation in the first place, and candidates, regardless of their skin colour, are saying, where do you stand on climate change? Where do you stand on sustainability? Where do you stand on racism? And I'm going to tell you it's racism, not where do you stand on diversity and inclusion. They're calling it out, because what they're thinking is, I'm different. I want to be in an environment that I know represents and fosters inclusivity to the nth degree.
And values it, right? Really values it.
And the organisations that they're looking for signals, because how else can you make an informed decision about where you go culturally? And I know what some people are saying to me is, if I'm going for an organisation that said they're doing something about racism, to be honest, I'm breathing a sigh of relief, because if they're going to take steps to do this, then it means this is like the worst of the inclusion, aspects that we have to deal with. So actually, me as a woman, me as a disabled person, me as a member of the LGBTQ plus community, knows that at least there's an openness for me, right?
Without judgment.
And that's the point. So if you're not doing anything, what you're saying is that we're fine for our business to only work for certain people. And if that's your decision, like, we're not sitting here in judgment, but you've got to understand the repercussions of that. And even HR,
I might choose to go somewhere else. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that goes back to HR teams understanding that, unfortunately, that's how people will look at the business, and they will look at the role you play. And even if, I'm talking to chief people officers that are leaving one business, going to another, and they're being asked at the interview stage, when the George Floyd protest happened, what were you leading as a business? You've got to be able, so there's an expectation now. It's not just about the executive leadership teams in terms of the frontline business, HR, recruitment. What did you do? Because those organizations want people who have done a little bit of
action,
work.
had some, absolutely. Yeah. And had a thought process around it,
Correct,
if nothing else.
Correct. That's it.
Without putting you on the spot, and please feel free to decline answering this question. In your opinion, who's doing it well right now? Which company?
I would say, I couldn't give you an answer.
Okay.
And I tell you, and I can tell you why I can't give you
because
an answer.
There's more to be done.
Because it's not even that there's more to be done, Jen. I think everyone is so keen to make sure they look good, to stand up to media scrutiny. And there's a bit of a mismatch between public values, public statements, public plans, and and what's going on there, and the experience of Black colleagues and other marginalized colleagues and other underrepresented colleagues in the business, until we start to see a primary focus on what's going on underneath the car bonnet versus how shiny the windows are.
Yeah.
That's when, as I like to, everyone always says, Shereen, you're giving us gold stars yet? I went, no, you're almost on the way. It's like a standing joke for some of my clients. Do we get a gold star for this? I said, yes, we're having the conversation. No, we're not there yet, folks. Because, and you've always got to remember, that this, and you've got to have some humor in it, even though, because otherwise, I won't be able to continue doing this work.
No.
But yeah, there's a long way to go, but we need to do more to support colleagues that are already in businesses and not just go for window dressing. So that's why I'm nobody gets a gold star from me yet.
And I think that is the epitome of, it isn't the project, it's the lifelong work, and we've got a long way to go on that journey.
Yes, that's it, exactly.
Shereen, you've been an absolute superstar. Thank you so much for your insight. Anyone watching this, you'll be able to click on Shereen's details below to connect with her directly. And if you are looking for any consultancy support regarding how you address racism in your organization, then please do feel to reach out to Shereen directly. I'm sure she'll be very happy to have that conversation. Thank you.
We'll get you started.